Well, hello, I'm Ian McPherson, and this is another episode of Tales of the Mile of Gold. 50 years ago, this Saturday, the moon landing happened. Just to give you a little context, 40 years before that, on Friday, Sid Hamden was born. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, very welcome. I'm happy to be here.
So, where were you born?
I was born in a little place in Saskatchewan called Climax, and way back in the 20s, when the crops were great, Climax had 5 major grain elevators, and that would tell anyone around that this place is really moving on as far as agriculture is concerned.
You know, that surprises me. I've known you for a long time, and somehow I thought you were going to tell me you came from Syria, but obviously your parents did.
My dad did, Lebanon, and
from Lebanon.
yeah, from Lebanon, and he wasn't the only one. That it was a survival situation then.
Yeah.
And
so what year would that have been? Turn of the century, before?
It was in the early, and we're not really sure of that, but it's in the early 1900s. He was born in the late, it was 1918 something, but I never did see the actual time on that, but he came here. He was 14 years of age then, and he had heard about mines, but he didn't go to mines at
No.
that time. No, he went straight up west because he was a farmer.
A Lebanese farmer.
Yes, a Lebanese farmer.
So it's a far cry now from Saskatchewan to Kirkland Lake, so
Yes, it is.
bring me through the process.
Okay, I'll go right back to how why I'm here in Ontario as such. I was 5 years old, and in the 30s, and there was a major world depression, as we know.
Yeah.
And it was one of the worst that's ever been around, as I understand. And as I said, my dad had heard about jobs in mines in the early days, but he loved farming, so we went out there. And then the crops started to diminish in the early 30s. And my mother and he felt that they were going to have to find a place where they could survive. So they picked Northern Ontario. And so we walked away from the farm, hopped on a train. I still don't know how they had the money to do it, but they must have saved up enough. Yeah, we were heading east. For some reason, the train had to go into USA. So it went down to Minneapolis, St. Paul, and anyway, any food we had on the train any open food had to be left in Canada in those early days. And I recall on that train too, just to show you what it was like in order to survive, I remember the old-fashioned coaches with the velvet seats sort of, and you're able to flip them back and forth, the backrest. And my parents, my mom and dad were on one side sitting there, and my older brother was 4 in the family, but just 2 at that time. We were sitting the other side. There was a suitcase right in the center, in between us, with a can of pork and beans, and we each had a small piece of bread. In other words, in those days, you can say it was survival, and it had to be because we're leaving home and going to a whole new world.
Yeah.
Anyway, we came to Cobalt first because my mom's family was in Cobalt. North Cobalt, to be exact. If you know the area.
Yes, I do.
And
yeah.
my mom's family had a farm on the Silver Center Road.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And
not in Lorraine, just along that corridor there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we were there for a short while. My dad then, he headed north. He heard about all the action up north here. He went to Timmins first, simply because of the big three, Hollinger, McIntyre, and I forgot the name.
Dome.
Sorry?
The Dome?
The Dome, exactly. Yes. Those 3 were the big 3. And he went up there, but there were a few jobs, as you said, but not as many, I guess. So he came back to Kirkland Lake, and he managed to get a job at Macassa, where he was for 38 years.
So that's your first connection with Shappy Hughes, then, I suppose?
Exactly. And here we were in a whole new world. When we arrived there in Shappy, I can still see it. I was 5 years old, and I can still see it, where our neighbors came over too. They shook our hands. It was one big happy family, houses all close together, no locks on the doors. They didn't need in those days. And they welcomed us, and they said, well, there's a good shopping area, and that was down here, Kirkland Lake. So we we got settled and we enjoyed it simply because of the neighbors right off the bat, you know, and we felt we're going to do okay after having to walk away from a farm to survive.
You know, we just, the reunion, we had the Shappy Hughes reunion. As a matter of fact, you're wearing a Shappy Hughes reunion hat. And that was the discussion I found talking to people at that part of our reunion, the Shappy reunion, at how other people's parents kind of took an interest in all the kids, not just their kids. Everybody seemed to get involved in their children. I suppose that happens today, but boy, it was. We were it back then. Kids were it.
It was one big happy family, just like you're saying. You know, and as I say, locking doors was, you know, yes and no sort of. You know, we weren't going to worry about it. And I think one of the reasons too why it was one big happy family, because in our day there was no such thing as computers or iPhones or whatever.
Yeah.
And we would, and there was right now there were 4 of us I can see, sometimes 5 or 6 of young people. We were in our 12 years old, 13, 14. And first of all, we'd play outdoor games, and other kids would join us right on the street. You know, they're coming in from other families, and that's one of the reasons why we had this connection with all families. You know, it was really a warm connection. And then other days, if we weren't around, and my mom was looking for me, my neighbor might say, well, they went to Lake Shore, behind Lake Shore Mine. And what's behind Lake Shore Mine? First of all, that was a major mine in the world. And anyway, behind the mine was a swamp with reeds, you know, and birds, ducks and blackbirds. And there were 4 or 5 of us. I think we were all wearing the clothes that we'll say Huckleberry Finmore or Tom Sawyer and all these guys. And we would have in our back pocket a slingshot. We would be on these wooden rafts that we made behind Lake Shore Mine in the swamp and pushing ourselves. And I was never a swimmer. The water was 4 or 5 feet deep, but we enjoyed ourselves. And so families would almost know where everybody has gone. It just, you know, because the doors are open and everybody's sitting out on their porches, on the verandas and such.
And playing on the slimes. Don't forget the slimes.
The slimes. That's where we, the boys, played knife.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
or
a very...
bow and arrow with bull rushes, I remember.
Well, okay, we made bows and arrows. We made elastic guns, rifles. We made swords. We would wear capes. We would play Batman and the rest of those guys. I mean, you know, without having to use electronic devices today, which I should be cheering because there's no doubt and electronics and electricity is my forte in life.
Yeah.
But it's got a negative side. And
well,
that negative side is, I think, people, or younger people, aren't doing as much, but I think they're starting to come back in certain ways, you know, by going to exercising. Well, we had exercising too, climbing trees in the bush.
So my memory of you being a kid is you as an educator, but there's a far leap now from a kid of 1940 to becoming an educator, so you better fill in the blanks there. I do remember an exhibit I witnessed at one time that you presented a bunch of theater equipment.
Okay.
But you better, let's back it up to how you got to that.
So I will tell you how I got wrapped up into that.
Sure.
Okay, yeah. First of all, my 3 uncles all had the same genes. I have the same genes that they had, I should say, electrical genes. My cousins were electrical. They're in the electrical field, electricians or electronics, whichever. My son is in the same boat. He's at CSA, Canadian Standards. He's got my genes too.
Is he?
Yeah.
boy.
Matter of fact, he's all over the world for CSA.
Yeah.
And he's able to retire right now, believe it or not. That means I can't still say I'm 39. But anyway, so when we came here, I was always interested in electric devices.
Yeah.
And I have to say this, and I hope my teachers are not around yet, because there was a fellow here, the first name was Bill, without mentioning his last name, and myself were in grade 9 KLCVI, taking one of the subjects, and it was a business practice. So you learn all about checks, and you learn all about receipts, how to make them out. But I was a fairly good student, but sometimes I pulled a few things, and so did he. And while the teacher's up there talking, showing us how to make it, so we had our books up here, and we were drawing electrical circuits in grade 9, radios and so forth. And anyways, I stayed in that field, and 1947, and I graduated from grade 12 on May the 15th, if I remember. And Lakeshore Mine, which was a world famous mine, as I know
Yes,
that you know that. And the anyway, I can add in there that of all the mines that I remember in South Africa, their output was the largest, but the gold from Lakeshore Mine was the richest in the world at that time. Yeah. Anyway, they were looking for 2 apprentices from KLCVI. So one of the boys from King Kirtland and myself, we graduated, and we went to the Lakeshore Mine, and we started on an electrical apprenticeship that was an apprenticeship. They had me on every piece of equipment that they had in the mine, and at the same time I had to take an engineering course of some sort, correspondence, while I was working with them. And I thought that was great. It gave me a background that I really needed. Yeah. And it was great. As I say, I was working on underground stuff too, installing a substation down there that we had, and I was on surface. I was only underground a short time. One of the electricians was ill, and for some time. And
can you tell me the name of some of these electricians? I always knew the name of some of the electricians in McCaffrey.
Yeah, well, there was one who was sick. He was a great guy. We called him Speedy Marshall. The family in town here. Now, they had one for the electrical, the superintendent, George Honer.
Oh, yes.
He was the superintendent, and the foreman, Eddie Butt.
Yes.
Now, his family's here in town.
Yeah.
And he was great. And as I say, between he and George Honer, I was working on every piece of equipment. In those days, I have to say, yes, Lakeshore definitely was a major mine in the world, because I know that South Africa, they had apparently more mines and their output was larger, but Lakeshore, like I said earlier, the gold was a high rate. And there isn't, or in any of the things I've looked up here over the years, I never found an area with mines of any kind that ever had 7 major mines, all within a radius of 2 miles. Right. And if you were driving in from the west or the east, you'd see these huge things up in the air, one shaft, another shaft, and
all in a line down there.
That's right, all in a line, and it was a curious thing if you knew, and then you wonder what the outside is like, what's the shopping like and everything else. And that's the way it was. When we came in, I was pretty young, but even then I thought, oh, what are all these things?
And they were so accessible, the mines.
Oh, man, big time.
I don't want to interrupt, but I remember as a cub going into a mine mill on Apple Day and selling apples on a Saturday. They let you do that.
Yeah.
I can say they got kids interested a little bit more, I think, in what was going on there.
Oh, definitely.
Perhaps. And that really surprises me that Lakeshore, you always hear about the big ominous Lakeshore, was bringing kids right out of high school to apprentice them. That's amazing. I never knew that happened.
That was special. That was really, that was one of the best things in my life. For them to call, they wanted to, we was very good students in that field. Yeah. And now the only thing is my friend there from King Kirtland, I can mention his name, I guess, if you wish on that, Gerald Harvey. I haven't seen him in years. He was from King Kirtland, but he joined the Air Force afterwards. Yeah. And then I'd seen him on and off, and he loved the electrical too, but even in those days, there are other fields. But you have to tell you, Macassa Mine, where my dad lived, he was there for 38 years, where he worked rather, and I said this before, I would joke with my dad, my older brother, that he worked there too. And I would say, well, where are you guys working? And they'd say, Macassa. Then I would sort of put my head, Chester, I'm at the lake shore. Macassa had 3 mills, ball mills. Yeah. In those early days, Lakeshore had 21. Yeah. It was huge. Yeah. But all the mines were really, and one other thing while I'm talking about the mines, in regard to the Toburn display, and I'm sure you've heard of Tech Cable.
Yes.
Tech U's mine.
Yeah.
Tech Cable was invented
There,
right here.
Like a wire rope?
Yes.
Is that what it was? It was rope made out of wire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what happened beforehand? I think you've seen armored cable, electrical cable. So in the mines they had electrical cable, they had the armor and they had a lead sheath. So in the mill where they got various acids and other solutions going, over the years, the metal shield would be eaten right off of that cable.
Oh.
The metal shield there,
Yeah.
protection basically from objects. And the only thing left would be the lead sheet. So that Tech U's, I'm not sure what year that actually happened, but it's early years. And as a matter of fact, there is
that's Tech Cable. Okay, I'm thinking of something else when I say wire rope.
They display right now in the museum, which I made up here for this centennial of the cable itself.
Okay.
And the situation that it was made here. So there you are. We have a first.
So
area.
now you're an electrician, but you still haven't brought me into the cinema yet.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so I was at Lakeshore Mine. I was there 5.5 years. Mr. Honer came up to me one day and he said, "Sid, I don't like to let you go, but I have to." They were also cutting down.
Well, yeah.
And what he said, you're the only single person working at the time, which I was. The others were all married. And anyway, it was how can I put this? Really a pleasure in disguise, I'll put it that way. I was getting laid off, and yet I had the world at my fingertips, which really worked. So here it is. So what I did, I went fishing for about 2 or 3 weeks and hunting in the fall. And then I had a phone call. And the phone call was from Emmett O'Halloran. And he had his own electrical business here in town. He did residential, commercial, industrial, whatever the job was. So he phoned me up. He said, "I heard you're an electrician." Because after 5.5 years, I went through a process until I became a fully fledged when I left the mine. So he said, "I need an electrician." And so I got a job with him. And he said, a little bit different from mining. I mean, we're doing, commercial, industrial, residential. And the other side of the coin is you have to work a little faster because people don't want to get a big bill. Whereas at a mine, it might be a little bit different. Well, in our day, when I worked at the mine at Lake Shore, it wasn't so different. We started at 7 o'clock in the morning, and you don't stop for coffee, you're not supposed to. And you stop at noon, 5 hours ago. Anyway, it was a real learning experience. So I got working for O'Halloran. And he, as I said, industrial, commercial, and one of the commercial areas that he was in the theaters, doing repair work in our theaters. And in those days we had the Strand, the Uptown, and LaSalle. So the Uptown, he had a project there, so I was with him. And here I would go into the projection room to see these 800-pound projectors. And what his job was to synchronize the two projectors electrically and mechanically to run a film at exactly the same time. And it would give you a 3D effect with glasses that you wore, one red and one blue. And if the House of Wax was the first movie came out, and they were throwing chairs in there, so you'd be in the auditorium in your chair, and in your seat, your chair, and the fella in the screen, I remember throwing a chair, we all ducked. It comes right out with a three-dimension effect. And the reason for three-dimension, because in those days, they took the picture from 2 different angles.
Right.
And the job was to have them synchronized. But, so anyway, Nathan Kaplan, you might remember Nathan?
Yes,
Cappy, we called him.
Yeah.
He was the manager at the Uptown, and each one of the family was managed.
Sweet man.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. Anyway, he comes up and he sees me working there with Emmett O'Halloran, the electrician. He says, "Sid, there's a good job for you. You be an operator, projections. I call us operators." I says, "No, I'm young. I'm a good-looking guy. I got hair in my head, and working like that. No, I want to be out there with the rest, having fun." Anyway, then Mr. O'Halloran had to lay me off. It wasn't any work, That's good. So I'll go hunting again or fishing. So he laid me off, and then I thought about the theater business. Because I was interested before that in my own cameras. The old box camera I had, and then it went back to other cameras. So anyway, I gave Cappy a call. He says, yeah. He says, come on down. And he says, here's the way it works. You're the apprentice. You have to speak to one of the operators who's licensed and see if he will take you on and teach you the ups and downs of theater business. And anyway, and I have to pay him, that type of thing. I said, that's no problem. I wouldn't mind doing it. Yeah. So George Pilon, you may have heard of the name. He's gone now. He was a fabulous projectionist. And anyway, LaSalle was his area. And a swingman too. All theaters go and they swing back and forth. So it was one of the operators asked some time off. So anyway, I went in the Uptown Theater at that time. I can't think I can see the fellow's name to me, but the regular operator was there.
Well, set it up for me. How many performances of a movie would go on daily there at that time? Really 50s?
They were continuous in general. Not all of them. It would vary. Yeah. 1 o'clock to 11:30 or so, right through.
Really? Starting with matinees. Yeah. A couple, and then on into the evening.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Just thinking in regard to the Strand. Yeah, the Strand normally, well, it was continuous too. They all were, but they varied. Yeah. But okay. And so what happened? How I got into it through this? I went into the Uptown. I just walked up there, and that's the other thing. The sign on there, no admittance unless you're licensed. Right. So I go in, and George was there, and not the original fellow that I really knew who ran the theater. And I see a new fellow in there, and he said, "What are you doing here?" And we got talking, and we became friends, and I told him the situation. So he took me on, and he said, "We'll be at LaSalle mostly." And anyway, then I said, "Okay, how much do you want? How do you run it?" Well, he said, "We'll see what happens." Anyway, we got maybe a third into it. He said, "I'm not going to charge you." And I said, "Why?" Because you're electrical, and it's all electrical and electronics, and I had a good background. But anyways, we became friends, and he showed me all the ins and outs, CinemaScope, you name it. And so I was you might say, the person that they would call. I wasn't at any of them for any steady time, but often if somebody go on their holidays, I'd be there. So I ran the LaSalle, I ran the Uptown, I ran the Strand, I ran the Capitol Theater in Larder Lake, and we had a drive-in here too, which I got. And
was the Melron part of it?
Yes, no, it was really separate, but it became, it was owned afterwards by Kaplanson. Okay. That's the thing, I'm not so sure. I've heard various things on it, but anyway, because it originated from New Liskeard. I can't remember the name. Okay. They started it, and but it was kind of neat. I enjoyed that. It was a whole different world, and it was something very special working at a 35 millimeter film, and people in general, and even nowadays, I'd like to see the theater again. The only one thing, as far as the projection is concerned, it's not as much fun. It's all electronic.
Yeah.
The other days we'd make a changeover, and if you're watching one of the old movies, you may have seen a black dot or a colored star in the right-hand upper corner.
Okay. Now I'm going to be looking for them. I don't know.
But now that I mentioned,
does that mean the movies, the reel's changing?
That's right.
That's a cue.
Yeah. Near the end of the film, a bell rings on the end of the spool because it's going faster, and then you light up your arc lamp. And they were arc lamps. We used carbon arc, which were very, very bright. And
anyway, that's part of the entertainment thing. But the other part of the entertainment thing I know about you is the saxophone. The saxophone.
Yes.
Where did that come from?
Many years ago, I wanted to play accordion. So I bought an accordion.
Everybody wants to play accordion. Yeah. Oh, a little concertina.
Yeah. Well, it was, and then I got into a smaller accordion piano, and then I got into the 120 bass one. My brother Gord was in high school then, and he was in the school band. And anyway, he formed his own band, a swing band in town here. And I have to say, in the 50s, we had swing bands all over. Yeah. It was great. Anyway, so he had 3 saxophone players, and anyway, one of them had to move or something, and a dance was coming up. Lakeshore Mine was running a New Year's dance,
Oh boy.
and he needed a 3rd sax. Well, I could read music, just getting into it. Saxophone, I hardly even knew what it was. He says, we need a sax player. And so he says, I can get you a brand new sax. How can you get me a brand new sax? Well, join the Algonquin Army that we had here, the band, which you probably. So I had to join that, and I got a brand new sax there, and I started to play it. And why we went up.
No, but not overnight, surely.
No,
Did you pick it up that quickly?
Once a week there'd be a practice for it in the band, but then on the weekend comes and we take the same instrument we'd be playing maybe in one of the halls here in town, a dance band. So I get wrapped up in
No,
that.
but as far as how much lead time did you have for this New Year's dance to play the saxophone? A week?
September,
Oh,
from September up, and that's I learned.
I had a vision that maybe it played 4 bass notes and that was sort of it. No.
Oh, yeah. The only thing is that I was on the 3rd sax, so the lead sax had all the major.
Well, that stuck with you a long time
Yeah.
because brass bands and everything right up. Are you still playing?
I am still playing, and I have to tell you, it's funny that you bring this up because in the last while, simply because of some home situations, I haven't had the time. But I have my own band, and my own band is such that they cannot talk back to me.
Yeah.
My band is on a CD. The background, I'm the soloist.
Oh, I see.
And simple reason is because as far as brass instruments are concerned, or reed instruments are concerned, we don't have many in town at all. And to my knowledge, there's myself, a sax player, and one other person, a friend of mine. But I would like to bring back, and other people have asked me this, would be nice to bring back some of the swing band music again. So I've got a huge library of different types, from swing music to rock music to jazz, and classics, you name it, pretty well. And it works well. So I'm hoping in the fall to get going again.
Well, let's let me start over again. Let's move on to your teaching career, which to me seems to span an awful long amount of time. I don't know how you had time to jam it into it.
Well, you hit that right on. You know, what happened was that after the theater business here, the man who, Emmett O'Halloran, the contractor, I was working for him, he sold his business and he went down to Elliott Lake. And at that time, I went up to Chapleau. And I opened up a new theater and worked there for a year and a half.
Oh.
And anyway, I'm up there. I'm making $60 a week, and I thought it was good money.
Yeah.
And anyway, he phoned me up there, and he needed electricians. He says, Sid, he said, how would you like to make $575 a month? I said, no problem there. Where?
Wow.
And those were the boom years, Elliott Lake,
Elliott
you probably
Lake,
know.
yeah.
So I went down there, and I became.
Which, incidentally, from everything I've ever heard, was the United Nations.
Oh, yes,
It
yes.
was like it all over again.
Yeah.
Maybe the last time that was going to happen in Canada.
There were
Elliott
more
Lake.
new cars in Elliott Lake
Yeah.
of miners, you know, but they had the money, the wages were good. When they're sinking shafts, you know, they obviously get that shaft down there regardless.
Yeah.
The word safety wasn't invented yet.
Yeah.
I can tell you many things that happened.
Yeah.
But anyway.
And every nationality, I want to add too.
What was that? I'm sorry.
Every nationality you can think of. All,
Yes,
yeah.
every
If
nationality.
you had the skill,
Well,
you
yeah.
were there. Yeah.
Anyway, I went down there by all means, and I was in charge of the electrical, I can met mines, and Stan Rock, I worked there too for a bit. And the word safety wasn't even known in those days. You might be sleeping in a bunk that you had right there in the property. They're blasting the shaft. The point was in the shaft drilling was to make progress, keep going down.
Yeah.
They were going down 10 feet a day, and which was a lot, and all the timbering and everything done. So anyways, now and then they knock on my door. It's always in the morning, at 2 o'clock in the morning. Sid, we need an electrician. They're blasting down below in the shaft and rocks flying all over.
Yeah.
It cuts the floodlights, you know, the line. And I said, no, at 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm half asleep. I got to hop on the bucket, no cages, just a great big bucket. And you're supposed to be in the bucket, but no, everybody was. They not do that. Was stand on the rim,
Right.
and you got your arm around the chain. Can you imagine? You're going down, And we're going down, and I let the hoistman know where the brake is approximately, and I see it with my headlamp here, and wouldn't you know it, it's way on the other side of the shaft, which means then I signal him on the line that runs all the way down the shaft. He stops, I get off, I walk on the BC for 12 inches, it's soaking wet in the shaft, and my back is up against the rock. If I had one slip, I'm gone. But the word safety was, the thing was, make time, you know, the industry has to go. But the experience was great, I enjoyed it. So I was there actually for 5 months, and I came home, and my brother Gord was in his first year teaching at Queen E. And he said the electrical job was open at the high school. And when you know it was my teacher that I had, the electrical teacher, he was quite sick, and he had to leave at Christmas time. And as Gord said, the job is open, and I should register and see if I can get it. But I was a very, very, very shy person. I really was. I mean, I wasn't the talker in those days.
Well, you're making up for lost time.
Making up for it right now. Sometimes, yeah, I've heard from different people, hey, that's enough.
No.
Anyway, I decided, and anyway, the principal was at his house, and I called up. It was a stormy night there at Christmas time, and went up, knocked on the door. I'm standing on the mat. He asked me if I had my grade 12 and a number of years experience in the trade, which at that time I had 10. And he said, well, we'll let you know. And there were 4 other people who applied for the job. He called me next day and said I got the job. I was happy and scared at the same time. I mean, you know, going in. So I went in January the 3rd, 1957, and I taught electrical.
Jeez. And did you have a curriculum to take advantage of?
They had, and I went through there, yeah.
Lesson plans, things like that?
But, you know, my experience and that engineering course that I told you I'd taken there at Lakeshore Mine was great. It gave me a good background. Yeah. And what happened in those days, of course, that's the way it was as far as the shops are concerned. If they needed somebody, they're able to get a person on a letter of standing. And then the next year, you go to Ontario College of Education.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
But nowadays they can't do that apparently. They got to go there first. And
so that means the summer taking summer school.
Yeah. Well, when I went, they had the summer course and the full year course, and actually the full year course was the best, because when I was down there in Toronto, I had access of going practice teaching in various schools. Yeah. Central Tech in Toronto, which was a huge school. Yes. Danforth Tech. Yeah. And London had a huge one, you know.
Northern Tech.
Tech there too they had, and they were great. And I have to tell you, and I've said it before in public, we've got to do something nowadays in regard to technical education.
Oh yeah.
They can't. Any of the businesses in town here, they can't find tradesmen. They're not there. Yeah. And my son, who's at CSA, which I mentioned earlier, he said to me one day, we'll get talking about this situation, and he had a fair number of individuals working under him from other parts of the world, Asia and Europe. Mm-hmm. And I said, is there anybody from Canada? Well, we don't have as many. We really don't. And the other thing he said, the people over there, because of their hardships, they have to work and they know how to work hard. And that's where they did words. And, you know, we got to do something differently.
So take me now, let's pick a year, 1962.
Okay.
KLCVI.
Yeah. 2,000
students maybe? Darn close to it.
Yeah.
I know by the time I got there in mid-60s, it was still 1,900, so.
Well, let's move ahead first up to 1972. We had 114 teachers in 1972. The years that just blossomed were the early 60s, definitely. Yeah. And that's when John Robarts, Premier in Ontario, I believe he was at the time, he said, we've got to do something in Ontario and in Canada for education, and, you know, in general. So that's when they brought in science, technology, and trades.
Right, which I was a product of.
Yeah, that was great. It worked like a charm.
Yeah, I got a good basic.
Right.
But I just can't imagine the numbers you were dealing with in those shop programs. How many were sitting in on a standard grade 10 class in
I hear you on that.
Electrical? But would it be 30 students in electrical at a time or higher per class?
It'd be higher, variable, but...
What I do remember of that is the discipline that everybody insisted on.
That's
in those
something.
shop classes.
My forte discipline.
Yeah.
My one daughter is a vice principal in Barrie. My son-in-law is a high school principal.
Yeah.
And I must say, and people even know this, it's not the same. I mean,
No.
I've been in schools, not just here, but in various places, that there seems to be more people in the hall than there should be in the classroom. But maybe there's something in there, I don't know.
Yeah.
In our day, there's no doubt, we were either in a study or in a classroom.
Yeah.
And I have to say, if you weren't there for exam Monday morning, you got the easy mark. It's what they call a 0. And what it did, it built character.
Yeah.
And I can honestly say that from my experience of students that I had in this town who came back to me often, I bet at least 6 or 7 students, I can still see them right today. And they would say, sir, yes, you're right. Now, I said, look, you have to earn whatever you get. You got to earn. If you want that mark, you got to earn it. You know. But
I do know now that I'm, retired and
Yeah.
looking back, I can't look back nearly as far as you can, but to me, it was a different situation entirely at Cal CVI. You were there to learn, and if you weren't there to learn, they made you learn almost.
it,
And what a wonderful school.
I have to.
It breaks my heart it's not there anymore.
It breaks my heart also big time.
Yeah.
But I have to tell you, when in the technical education, and I was going to Ontario College of Education, professor, I can still see him, the big professor, tall. I was 27 and others were older than I was. When he walked in, we were just like students. We didn't even move.
Yeah.
But whatever he said was really focused on you.
Yeah.
And he said, now, this was, of course, technical, which involved I can't think of the words here, home cooking, the girls who are in
Oh, yes.
doing, and boys too. Anyway, he said, there may be days, and he was the top man in the province for tech education. There may be days, he would say, that you may have to use brute force.
Yeah.
Whew. So what does that mean? That you're able to grab a person or use a strap, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you that me being just a small person, I said to myself, I've got to get a focus on this one. I really did, And I was always more or less a shy person in my young years. And I said, I got to show them who's boss, And I found out, looking my student right in the eye, but still being open to their interests, and that worked like a charm too. But in our day, I know of teachers who did, mainly shop teachers, who would swat a person on the back with a yardstick. And I can tell you, even at our own school, I was in one of the shops there as assistant shop director. One of my duties was to be sure that all the safety programs are working in every shop, so I'd be going in it. And I went into one shop, and the student comes up with a project, which he had broken. And he comes up to the teacher, and he stuttered quite badly. He says, sir, he said, I still see him. I'm sorry. And he bent over, wanting to get the yardstick.
Yeah.
And the teacher says, no, it's okay. Here's what I want you to do next time. But the students, then what he said, don't tell my parents, because they would make it worse for him at home. Because in general, parents in those days were really standing behind the teachers.
Yes.
I mean, we nowadays today, but I'm not so sure it's 100%. Because, and I have experiences that I had before I left teaching, where it was the other way around.
After all that, I know you from the Literacy Council. It would seem to be something that you really took a great deal of interest in, a great deal of pride, and many people know you for. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was great. I really enjoyed that. When I first started to teach, well, before, no, sorry. Way back, I used to stutter very badly, and anyways, I worked out of it. And even nowadays, if I'm going a mile a minute, simply because my brain says, you haven't got time, keep going there, and so I retired, and my wife, Myrta, who is a social worker, she was a children's aide and the social department here in town for years. So I had retired, and she was at one meeting, and they wanted to get a literacy council going, a class for the adults here in town.
Yes.
And my wife says, I know somebody who has some time. So she tells me this at home. I said, hey, my fishing time. I just retired. I want to do something.
Yeah, you want to go hunting and fishing again.
Because of my interest in teaching, which I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
And so I said I would do it. Anyway, I got into it. I started the literacy council we have here in town.
Yeah.
I was in there for 17 years, and,
Yeah.
and then others took over, and now we have it in Northern College, and they do get grants. In our day, we didn't get a grant. We had to raise money.
Oh, I know. It was
Yeah. But
all volunteer, a lot of committed people that,
and you know what?
that you committed. You got them interested in it.
Well, I think
You
know,
motivated them, that's the word.
Well, you know, one of the reasons really that
And
I
without a yardstick.
yeah, the yardstick situation. Yeah, one of the reasons was when my dad came in from Lebanon, and as we grew up, he always told us, son, be kind to your neighbor, work with your neighbor. He used to tell us that, and we need more of that. And watching, just throwing in something here fast, and watching Prince Harry's wedding, there was a speaker in there, either a priest or a pope anyway, and I think the focus was on him in that wedding, and his last line I'll never forget. And the way he said it, what this world needs is more love.
Yeah.
And that's right. I mean,
I remember that was the American minister that.
I think it was. All I know is one, but that line stands there. It is indelibly etched in my mind. Yeah. But no, literacy was great. We'd have adults coming in there. There were about 3 of them over the years that they were up there in years.
Yeah.
Could not read.
And
there was one that came in one day, never forget. He says, I can't keep doing this every day. I didn't know what he's talking about. No, I said, what? He says, I can't keep saying to anybody who wants me to make a speech, I forgot my glasses. That's the way that he got out of it. He couldn't read. So he would say, I'm wearing glasses, but he didn't really. So it was a sentimental type of thing, very much.
Yeah. And did they read in the end?
We had them reading and doing projects, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, my wife's wrapped up in there. We had various people in there. It was great. It was great to see adults come in a way. Just, they needed this, and I really felt so good for them to have to come in and say, I can't read. Yeah, and it worked.
Sid, I'm a better guy for knowing you. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome.